Hello everybody, and thank you very much for taking the time out to join us today on this Nuix webinar. Today we're going to be talking about intelligence, collaboration and analytics for digital investigations within US government. My name is Paul Slater and I'm the Global Head of Investigations here at Nuix. Joining me today on this webinar, I have two of my colleagues. I have David Smith, who's our Chief Information Security Officer. Hi David, are you there?
Yes, I am. Good morning.
Hey, David. Thank you for joining us. And also I've got Michael J. Staggs, who's one of our senior solution consultants here at Nuix. Hi, Michael. Are you there as well?
Good morning, sir. I am here.
Cool. And Michael, you like to be called MJ, right? Are you happy for me to call you MJ through this presentation?
That's quite all right, sir. Almost everyone knows me as MJ. I will answer.
Cool, thank you for that. So just a little bit about what we're going to talk around. So obviously introducing our speakers. So my name's Paul Slater, as I said. I've been here at Nuix for 4 years. My current role is to look after our investigations business, and that really involves spending a lot of my time out in the market talking to customers and effectively making sure that what we bring into the product is really what our customers want. I've been involved in investigations for probably about 20 years now, and you can probably tell from my accent that I'm based over in the UK. My background involves a number of years in law enforcement, and leaving law enforcement, spent quite a few years within corporate, but I've effectively spent a lot of my time working in and around digital investigations. David, would you like to say hello and introduce yourself, please?
Yes, good morning. My name is David Smith. I am the Chief Information Security Officer for Nuix. I recently retired from the US Secret Service. I was an assistant special agent in charge and also the Deputy Chief Information Security Officer for the US Secret Service. I was there for 24 years, led a number of cybercrime investigations. I also taught forensics courses, cyber investigations courses, and was heavily involved in information security management. And it's my pleasure to be here.
Thank you, David. Our pleasure to have you here as well. And MJ, finally, but by no means least, want to say hello and introduce yourself, please.
Good morning, everyone. Michael J. Staggs, or MJ. My experience is mostly as a field agent and the technical guy. I bring the nuts and bolts to the table and the practical application of technology to today's investigations. Thank you, Paul.
Thank you very much. So as you can see from the slide, I have a little bit of the overview for the webinar. Effectively, we're going to touch on three main things. We're going to look at intelligence, collaboration and analytics. And then finally, we're going to take a look at what this all looks like in Nuix. And at the end, we'll hopefully have some time for some Q&A. So just to kind of position what we're going to talk about today, really. From a lot of our conversations with our customers out there in the market, they're telling us that obviously investigators need to evolve beyond traditional forensic tools and workflows so that they can become more efficient in the way that they examine the contents of multiple devices at a single time. And very often we're being told that key facts are rarely located within a single piece of evidence. Often it's around lots more pieces of devices, lots more evidence that needs to be looked at. And that can be across multiple people, or even contained in other investigations in a different agency or a different country. And really what we're trying to kind of talk around today is that to make investigations effective, it really requires people to be able to share intelligence, collaborate on the data and work across geographical and jurisdictional boundaries, and really try and find some of those seemingly hidden connections that are often hidden within evidential sources. Some of you may recognise this screen capture. It's taken from a TV series, but one of the reasons I've used this is because it kind of really highlights that when you start looking at what is actually involved in an investigation, they're becoming far more complicated than they were many, many years ago. And large investigations such as those in areas as counter-terrorism or organised crime may involve data sources from multiple suspects, and in today's kind of modern world, it can involve lots of dozens of devices and evidential sources. And we've moved beyond traditional computers now. More and more we're looking at social media, data from cloud, cameras, media players, smartphones, the Internet of Things, pretty much anything really can be potentially relevant within an investigation. And the challenges that investigators tell us that they have is looking to try and find the connections and effectively to look at how they can link people with objects and locations and events. And some statistics,
I love this slide, Paul. I absolutely love this slide. Forgive me for interrupting, sir, but
no, please do, MJ.
This brings back so many memories. This is how we used to do it back in the day. You'd have a pegboard or a whiteboard, photographs, newspaper clippings, drawing lines, or even running strings back and forth. And although I said back in the day, it really wasn't that many years ago that we were still doing this. I am so grateful now that we have a tool that will allow us to be able to do something like this in real time and adjust all of these individual nodes, or as you pointed out, the people, objects, locations, and events.
Yeah, and statistics, again, I'm sure you're seeing similar things on your side of the pond, MJ, but statistics are telling us now that the mobile devices, the rise of those is increasing. Some of the agencies that we work with over in the UK, they're telling us that phones are being seized 5 times as many as classic computers, and that really complicates the roadmap and the evidences that people need to look at. And as a diagram tries to explain that, trying to connect those dots and trying to link those things together is often very, very difficult.
Well, it gets even more difficult than that because now you have other items. You have the phone records that you get from subpoenas to the carriers. You have log files that come from those same carriers or internet connections. You have server log files. You have photographic images. You have banking records, transaction records. And all of this can be pertinent to your case, but there up until now, there hasn't been any one interface that would allow you to show you all of the relationships and see everything in one screen. Exactly.
And that brings us really now to the first point. So when we start to think around what are we trying to do here, a lot of the time we're trying to look at and bring up intelligence. And what is intelligence? And I think everybody probably on the call will have a different interpretation of what intelligence is. Whether it be the perception of artificial intelligence and the way that computers are starting to do machine learning, whether it be defining what makes a person human, sentient, whether it be a measurement of being clever, or whether it be, and again, the people on the call, intelligence from the perception of how agencies take information and use it to benefit their investigations. But I think it's interesting to point out the difference between information and intelligence. And you often hear a lot of people talking around these two topics and effectively interchanging the language. I think it's clear to say that information does not equal intelligence. Information without context has another name, and that really is data. And intelligence it's the next step in the evolution of identifying facts. And intelligence comes when we're able to piece these pieces of information together in a meaningful way to effectively maximize the story that each of those little pieces tells, to actually see the bigger picture. And from an investigation perspective, intelligence becomes vitally important when, as we said, and as you've quite rightly pointed out, MJ, we've got lots of different sources, and there's a need to kind of link together and work out exactly what's going on. So one of the points to kind of raise here is that digital evidence, by its very nature, doesn't really share its secrets easily, and there's lots of different challenges that investigators face when dealing with digital evidence. It can be simple things like getting access to that particular evidence. It can be the format that evidence sits in. It may well be it sits within memory and it's kind of transient and it will disappear. And that's really compounded by modern telecommunication technologies, which as we all know, make it far easier for criminals to operate now across different jurisdictions and national borders. And things like mobile devices and throwaway technology such as burner phones really kind of means that it's difficult to actually track people and understand exactly what's going on, because one person may have access to multiple devices. And hopefully people on the call, because it's difficult to do these when you can't see your audience, but hopefully people on the call will agree that agencies involved in investigations really need to look at an efficient technological framework in order to actually exchange intelligence, enable collaboration, and get things done quicker.
Paul, your point about jurisdiction is spot on, especially in working cases where your suspect is transient between multiple jurisdictions. Each individual area, for case in Seattle, for example, the investigators there may have a critical piece that would link everything together, but the suspect has now moved to Atlanta, and now they're committing their crimes in Atlanta, and they don't have access or any clue as to what has gone on in Seattle and the evidence that is there. There really needs to be a way to share the evidence and share the conclusions readily and easily between the two agencies. And that's just an example of two. Suspects now don't just go to one or two, they'll travel all across the United States, all across the world. And the fact that we can't link these cases together is a serious problem.
Yeah, and those people who may have seen some of our other webinars or have downloaded any of our white papers will know that for a long time we've been advocating an investigative workflow and methodology that really tries to make it possible to do that, to bring all these different devices into a single platform, a single pane of glass view onto that data, and effectively allowing people to see it, irrespective of where they are and what their role is. And again, as you say, MJ, it's not uncommon for that critical information to reside outside the evidence in a particular investigation. You know, it may be, as you say, in a previous or concurrent investigation being run by a different person in a different jurisdiction in a different country. And digital forensics tools have, classically developed and grown to allow people to dig further and further down, deeper into the data, deeper into the rabbit hole, and look at something to the nth degree on a single piece of evidence. And they can tell you everything you need to know about the binary structure of data on a hard drive, but they can tell you nothing at all about how that instant messenger and that the message history stored in a database that connects with a mobile device sees in another investigation, how those things link together. And there's a recent report which was produced by one of the national policing agencies, and they said intelligence management involves linking information from a wide range of sources in order to build up a composite picture. It's about building that intelligence. It aims to highlight links between people and objects and locations and events to essentially support the investigator. And traditional investigation methods really are all around comparing separate evidential sources and not effectively looking at it as a whole. MJ, anything you want to comment on that?
Well, the way I look at this is the classic poll, the people, objects, locations, and events that you've set up. And it's very difficult to grab all those disparate portions of evidence that are located in different agencies, in different jurisdictions, and then build that common picture, that intelligence that you spoke about earlier. Because without making the connections, all those is individual data points. And it actually gets even worse, because very rarely do you have the people that are doing the in-depth forensic examination, do they have the time to work with the field agents? And the agents, of course, are in the field. So how do you get those two people talking and understanding every single aspect of the case spread across so many different pieces of evidence in so many different jurisdictions? Once again, this is a real problem that we need to solve.
Yeah, and I think it's worthwhile noting that often a lot of the traditional technology that's out there can actually sometimes be an impediment to collaboration. And from the number of years I've been doing this, many of the technology products on the market are aimed at single user. They're aimed at one person with one license doing one investigation, and effectively that doesn't really bring into in today's kind of evolving world the different skill sets that we have between a traditional forensic investigator and the caseworkers or the investigating officers or the field agents, as you say, MJ. And I think one of the things that we've seen here at Nuix is that a lot of the technologies on the market have tried to solve the problem by effectively trying to bolt together different products into a workflow. And I've heard some of these described from a security perspective as it's almost like Frankenstein syndrome, whereby you're bringing these different technologies together and you're trying to graft them all into one solution, and that becomes cumbersome because a lot of the technologies on the market, they come from maybe a legal review background, and they're designed for looking at textual content, whether it be emails or documents. And again, as we all know on this call, today's world is much more driven by photographs and multimedia and video and social network and instant messaging and all those kind of things, which effectively now we're moving from that very kind of textual world to much more social media effectively. And I think there's also the fact that when you start to look at it in those kind of silos, it really is difficult to find some of the hidden connections. Forensic technicians, and certainly in my experience, the ones I've met and worked with, often work in isolation from the case investigators or from the field agents. The forensic specialists have often had to make pretty critical decisions around which pieces of evidence do they examine, how do they examine them, what processes do they apply on them, and actually they're often asked to identify and extract potentially relevant material without really understanding the broader details of the case. And I think, again, MJ, I look to you for an observation here. More often than not, it's the caseworker, the field agent, who really knows everything about that case, and they're the people that really need to be seeing that information.
Here's the real world example of that, unfortunately, but it is public record, so we can speak of this. The Casey and the Lacey Anderson case, where you had a district attorney who was looking at evidence that was presented by the forensic examiner that only looked at one browser history. The suspect actually was using another browser to look up how to use chloroform to sedate people and sedate children, whereas the forensic examiner was only looking at a browser that had not been used. So those historical artifacts of all of that research for use of that particular chemical for sedation, none of that evidence was presented in court. And if we had had some type of methodology at the time where the DA and the ADA were able to collaborate and go back to the examiner and ask the examiner for additional evidence, then perhaps we would not have seen that tragedy that occurred.
Yep, I couldn't agree more. And I think that brings us on nicely to when we look at what could be a very simple investigation. And I've got something on the screen now where a person A logs into a computer, accesses some confidential files, and maybe then does something with them, like post them on a website, for example. There's a clear thing to be looking for here. We can clearly understand it's a simple investigation. We know what we're going to be looking for. We know what sorts of data we need to bring into this. There's going to be information from the suspect's computer. There may be records around stored on the server. There may be the ability to go and scrape some information from WikiLeaks to actually see what happened. But when we actually start to look beyond that and we look at what would be an investigation today, often it isn't a single person who's being investigated. Often there are a number of different actors within this investigation. There's multiple different data sources. We can have data from systems outside our control. We can have data that doesn't lend itself to computer examination. Maybe it's doesn't have any text in it, and we may need to do some kind of process to bring the text out of the document. We could have data from a CCTV camera. We could have information around diaries and where people have been. And when you look at it from this perspective, to try and link people together and to try and understand who did what, where and when, it becomes far more complicated. And if you're actually trying to do different parts of this within different tool sets, so for example, maybe you're using one particular product to look at the log files, you're looking at another product to look at the phone data, and you're looking at a different product to look at the computer data, suddenly trying to correlate all of that together becomes incredibly difficult for the investigator to do. David, did you have any comments on that one?
Yeah, I'd like to give another case example, and that is the largest hacking case in the history of the world, which centered around one ringleader named Albert Gonzalez. And over the course of several years, this case ended up with 22 people either convicted or indicted, over 500 million credit cards compromised, over $1 billion in fraud losses and expenses to the victims. And the perpetrators came from 8 different countries. This case was successful because of the very hard work of the Secret Service and many other law enforcement agencies around the world. But one of the big breaks in the case that came when one investigator was by hand going through chat logs and was able to tie one critical suspect, the first suspect ever arrested in this case, and was able to tie that suspect to the ringleader. And that connection was really only made because we had investigators able to do that by hand. The amount of data that this case generated about 10 years ago was quite significant at that time. And you can just imagine if this type of case happened today, 10 years later, just how much more data we'd have, not to mention the explosion in social media information, cloud data, et cetera, et cetera. So the traditional forensic process that we've been talking about this morning, one of the big things that we need to remember is it just doesn't scale very well. So we need to start thinking about different ways of putting in data that we can not just analyze it as quickly as possible, but also that it can scale as we continue to add more and more information.
That's a good point.
Perfect. Yeah, perfect point, because one of the things that we obviously want to talk about is how we can use technology to actually augment human brain power. And I think we've touched on this without really going through the details on the slide, but you said in that example, David, people were doing this manually, right? Now, the common theme is that there's a considerable amount of human effort required to do some of these things that computers are much better at. So whether it be analysing log files or whether it be reading chat messages or whatever it may well be, if we can start to utilise the technology that is available, that will hopefully allow the investigator to find the key evidence faster and to put the bad guys away quicker.
Very good.
So how can we use intelligence then to sort of gain advantage? Well, we talked around traditional investigation models where we've collected different pieces of evidence, we've examined them separately. But that, and I think you touched on this already, MJ, something as simple as trying to prove that person A and person B both use the same stolen credit card number, that can be really complicated across different devices and different tools. And to look at how Nuix can help people solve that, well, one of the things that Nuix does out of the box is it allows us to automatically bring out some of these intelligence items using a methodology that we call named entities, where we can effectively pull out patterns of letters and numbers that resemble things. And it may well be looking for credit card numbers or IP addresses, mobile phone numbers, vehicle registration, passport details, or whatever. We can automatically start to bring that out so that when the investigator sits in front of our technology, some of the key intelligence items are already being identified, ready to go, basically. And just to sort of demonstrate that, really, one of the things that we are able to do is to bring in information from as many sources as you can possibly imagine, whether they be computers or hard drives or USB devices, mobile devices, cloud, whatever it may well be. And because our the Nuix engine effectively allows us to bring all that data in, understand all these different file formats, and index the data that we find, we can automatically start to bring out the entities, whether they be monetary values, whether we're looking at MD5 hashes or SHA-1 hashes relating to known good or bad files, vehicle registration numbers, etc., etc. We can bring all of those entities out to enable the investigator to start the investigation. And what does that look like in Nuix? And I know you're going to touch on this a little bit later on, MJ, when we get into a bit of a demonstration, but effectively we can build out these named entities and present them to our users so that they can look at them in a number of different ways. It may well be we want to look at a relationship map and see all of the different players within an investigation. Who's talking to who? What are they talking about? We can link that with named entities and actually start to see things like which people are talking about monetary values, which conversations have references to maybe a particular person or a particular ID reference. We can look at things like geolocational information. As everybody on the call I'm sure knows, most smartphones now, when you take a photograph or even when you're walking down the street, your geolocational information can be captured and can be extracted. Well, we can visualize that on a map. So if you want to try and see who was where and when, it's very easy to do by looking at a map effectively. If we want to start to link together and see who is talking to who are the players, we can start to visualize that in one of our interfaces called Context, which again I think you're going to touch on a little bit later, MJ, where we can start to demonstrate some of these connections. And part of the challenge that we have is to effectively build an intelligence-driven workflow, and whether we're bringing in information from the cloud, from a smartphone, from a hard drive, or from a textual document or whatever, one of the things we're trying to applicate here as a workflow is to bring all of that information into a Nuix case, whether it be from any of these devices, bring it into a single pane of glass view. We can apply a level of intelligence, or pulling out entities. We can apply a level of workflow, so why would we want to process certain file types based on the investigation? And we can wrap around that a layer of process to ensure that everything that we do is going to be auditable and repeatable and will allow us to stand up in court. And effectively, we can then start to slice and dice that evidence down, and we can use things like, well, maybe rather than giving all of the emails to somebody to review, we'll give them all of the emails that are responsive to keywords, or maybe we'll give them all of the log files within a particular date range. And we can actually start to use some of this intelligence that we've built, these named entities, to actually start to help direct the investigation. And one of the things that we're trying to advocate with some of these workflows is that once an investigation has happened, very often the intelligence that investigation presented is lost. I mean, I've got a great story around an investigation I was involved in many years ago back in the police, where the police force spent $1 million almost on having documents translated because they were in a different language and they needed to understand the content. That translation was then lost when they did the next investigation. Simple things like taking those translations, applying some unique reference, whether it be an MD5 or whether it be some other reference to that document. And when we process the data for the next case, if we've already seen that document, we can automatically give that translation to the investigating officer to look at. So again, we can reduce the time between collection and investigation. And some good examples. So again, I think you sort of stole my thunder, MJ, but it may well be there's an investigation going on in New York where we can pull out a list of suspect phone numbers, email addresses, maybe some online aliases and bank account numbers, and give it to our colleagues in Washington. And they can use that when they process their cases to see whether there are any connections. We can build, for example, a list of relevant words and phrases, referencing illegal or maybe inflammatory propaganda material, share these words list with other agencies, use things like near duplicate analysis to actually pull out things that look like things. All of these techniques are available within the platform, and essentially all of these are trying to make the investigation easier and quicker. And I think, David, you had an example here you wanted to talk about?
Yeah, so traditionally, a lot of law enforcement agencies don't necessarily share a lot of information. And with this platform, we're offering law enforcement agencies the ability to do just that, to be able to bring in different names, keywords, events, etc., and be able to share that so that investigations can be cross-referenced. And a good example of where that has been done traditionally is with the hash list that investigators share from the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children. So that's a very good model of how law enforcement can collaborate to be able to fight a particular type of crime. And that National Center for Missing and Exploited Children model has worked very, very well for many, many years. And this technology that we have offers law enforcement the capability to extend beyond just that.
Yeah, thank you. And MJ, I think you also wanted to say something at this point as well.
Well, we've obviously worked similar cases in different jurisdictions in our history. The two examples that you've given here, where you have one cell phone number, and then in the second example, you've got some relevant keywords and phrases. The ability to match all of those entities, the phone number, the email address, the credit card, the country, the plane ticket number, the vehicle registration, anything that you can express the pattern, or as we say, a regular expression, can be added as a named entity very easily. It's trivial. And you can share this amongst various agencies and various divisions within your own agency, and then make all this information available via a simple web browser login. So anyone around the world, anywhere, even on their phone, can come in and look at the processing and examine the clues and the evidence that the examiners have brought to light back in their lab immediately.
And that's perfect for the next conversation, but it's about collaboration. One of my favorite kind of geeky jokes on the screen for those who can see it. I mean, essentially, I guess the point for that slide is that, you know, there are classically in an investigation two sorts of people. There's the forensic investigators who, you know, their job should be to look at the, you know, the forensic registry hives and event logs and understanding stored applications and, you know, put some provenance around the information that people are finding. And then there's a technical and, you know, non-technical reviewers who, you know, want to look at emails and documents and pictures and videos, and effectively we enable the right person to do the right job and look at the right things, then we're going to make this much more efficient. And one of the workflows that we talk around is effectively a tiered workflow, whereby we can bring all of the data in, we can apply a number of automated processes, whether it be custom templates to effectively process a child exploitation case would obviously be different to a fraud case, would be different maybe to a theft case. We can apply different settings based on the case type to maximize the data we're going to bring out. We can do a level of automation. We can do things like a technology assisted review, where we use the technology in the software to actually bring out information that we need to look at. We can use things like machine learning to group together things that look like things, whether it be trying to identify all the pictures that look like guns or drugs or money, just to effectively aid the investigator. And the idea behind the first pass review is, let's get that kind of low-hanging fruit to the non-technical people so they can start their investigation as quickly as possible. And then we can start to look at a little bit, maybe slightly slower time, given some of the more detailed files and folders and documents, to the analysts to do maybe some more forensic work around that. Maybe they need to do a little bit of a deeper dive to start carving unallocated or whatever they will be. But this process is really designed to effectively use the technology to put the data into the right person's hands. So because all this sits within a Nuix case and all the data comes into one central repository, the Nuix case, we can expose different parts of that data to different people. So for example, we may have a case manager who wants to use our web review technology and use one of the dashboard perspectives to take a 60,000 foot view of the case and look at the relationships within the data, look at the hot documents, look at the entities that are being brought out based on that case type to effectively enable an efficient view of the remaining data. We can expose some of that data maybe to an analyst, and using some of our newer insight technology where we can start to link together across multiple cases, trying to work out the players and the actors and bring out that people, objects, locations and events. We can allow the forensic investigator to use our workbench technology and do that really deep dive forensic analysis. Maybe they want to do some carving or want to look at some binary. They can do that at the same time. We can expose to maybe an investigating officer a subset of the data, for example, the images, and they can look at that with either with a web review, or they can actually use our workbench and start to categorize things together, so they can very, very quickly see the potentially relevant files and images within the data set. And finally, we can expose maybe a subset of those documents to our legal or HR or compliance teams, who can then effectively look at the data that has been found and apply a level of legal review to that information. And I think, David, you wanted to comment here around traditional forensics and how this is a kind of a different perspective on that.
Yeah, to go back to that slide that you presented earlier that had the whiteboard with the different photos and the lines and all that, and that as I believe MJ has said, has been used for years and years, particularly with intelligence cases and organized crime cases. But we are going to want to use that for newer types of investigations, particularly data breach investigations that span multiple locations, multiple suspects, lots of different data sources. And that old whiteboard, pegboard, physical environment is just not going to scale very well or work very well. But this Nuix platform that we're talking about is absolutely perfect for these types of complicated investigations. And the real-time or the near real-time aspect is going to be absolutely critical. As I said before, we need to scale with the huge volumes of data that we're ingesting in today's investigations.
Thank you. And that brings us on to the final point. So looking at analytics, and I'm just cautious of time as well here. So one of the things that obviously will enable investigators to get more is, as it does become, as we've all sort of agreed, becomes more complex, being able to kind of start to look at it from a different perspective, being able to kind of apply analytical techniques across that data to actually see things that maybe aren't visible through a simple method of line by line analysis of a document or a spreadsheet. For example, you could take an entire data set and limit it to just email messages within a particular data range that contain credit card numbers. And if you've got too many results still, you could maybe then start to apply some keyword searches to that. You could then drop it into a network diagram to see who's emailing who. Look at that on a timeline to actually start to see how these things unfold all the time. Maybe we start looking for tracking a message through its history. Now will be, I send a message to you, David, you send a message on to MJ, and MJ then sends it on to somebody else. Well, being able to sort of see that kind of tracking through time is invaluable, really. And all of these kind of timeline and link analysis and mapping and data trending and communication networks. I'm sure, MJ, you're going to give us a little bit of a demonstration of that when we move on to you in a minute or two. But before we do, does anybody have any other comments to add on this so far? Are we good? Perfect.
Very good.
Well, you've heard me talk a lot, and you've obviously had some really good comment back from David and from MJ, but it really is kind of time now to put it all together into Nuix, and what does this look like within our technology. So hopefully, Nick, if you can pass on the baton to MJ, who can now demonstrate this to everybody.
Good day, everyone. This is MJ. Paul, I'd like you to verify if you can see my screen. I've got the Nuix workstation interface up.
I can see it perfectly. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you very much, sir. Okay, everyone. Paul and David have set an excellent stage laying the groundwork for what our problem is and how we propose to solve it. Let's get to work and actually use the tool itself and catch ourselves some bad guys. Well, what I've got going on right now is the Nuix workstation. We have a wide suite of products, but right now in this particular demonstration, we're going into the workstation. This is what the forensic examiner would have in front of them. And our scenario is we're in our lab and we've got a bunch of different evidence sources. We've got a bunch of SQL logs. We've got some phones seized in the illegal sale and possession case. We've raided a terrorist safe house. We've got some insider threat going on, perhaps some leaked classified data, a homicide case, an email case. We've even got some packet capture files. And all of this, back in the day, individual agents or examiners would have to look at each individual one separately. And then everybody all get together in a room and compare notes and make that pegboard or that whiteboard that Paul illustrated in his slides. Not anymore. What we can do is we can combine them all together, and I've done so in this what I call multi-data case. And in this multi-data case, I've got all of those portions, all of those individual evidence items all gathered together in one screen so I can see the connections. I've got a bunch of cell phones. I've got a bunch of XRY and UFUD images from Celebrate. I've got USB drives. I've got some log files, an iPhone, an Exchange database, some hard drives. There's my PCAPs, and there's my PST files, the loose PSTs that were grabbed from a suspect's hard drive when we seized their drive at their home or their place of business. Well, all of this information in the old days, you'd get this screen where you'd have the name of the data, the date, the file type, and the path, and you'd have to go through each individual item, look at it and read it and try and understand what was going on and make those connections manually. Sometimes the technology would allow you to go to individual items, such as I'm doing here, and isolate, as Paul mentioned, just look at the email or just look at the calendar events or spreadsheets in a financial case. But you'd still have to go and you'd still have to drill into each individual item and then look on the side, look at the individual email, look at the individual text, look at the metadata, and then try and figure out exactly what was going on in the case. This took a lot of time, a lot of effort, and again, the suspect is getting away, committing another crime, harming another child. We just can't tolerate that. So what we've done in Nuix is we've made it a whole lot easier. I'm going to go ahead and reset back to my original, where I've got this big mess of data, and go through a very simple workflow. One of the things that we do a lot in Nuix is we assist our corporate clients and our government clients in doing intellectual property searches or classified data searches. And you can't speak about that outside of the classified space, and you can't speak about that on over the phone, over a clear phone. So what we've done is we've created a simulated case. And this case is our great sandwich shop conspiracy, where someone is leaking the formula for creating the special bread or the secret sauce for the sandwich shop, and this data has leaked outside, and we want to find out all of the connections, where this data is leaked, what emails it's associated what credit cards it's associated with, what countries it's went to, what people, what addresses it's associated with, all in one screen. And again, in the old days, you had to read one message here. Okay, we found Turkey there, and we've got some streaming here. Yeah, that looks like that's a false positive. Then we've got chicken here. Okay, we've got all our hits on our classified lunch meats keywords, but you have to build all this together. And then, okay, we go up and let's search for an IP or do a complex regular expression here. And it was just clunky. What we've done in Nuix is allow you to view all of this in context. And it's just as simple as clicking up on this bar, choosing a profile, and going into the context profile, which shows the named entities that Paul spoke about earlier. I'm going to go ahead and expand those and show you how out of the 200,000 evidence items we started with and the 24 different evidence sets and cases we started with, we've concentrated all of the addresses, company, country, credit cards, email. We've isolated all of these across those numerous cases. So for example, if you wanted to see the context of every single IP address in relationship to credit cards and phone numbers and emails, you can immediately see that this person is associated with this company, which is associated with this IP address, which is associated with this email, and this country, and let me adjust my real estate a little further here, this data type, talking about this money, and going to this particular universal resource locator. And in the case of transferring documents, we even have the ability to show you the author in case we're looking at a leaked document, whether it's intellectual property or a classified document. All of these are immediately shown in context such that you don't have to do the digging. You don't have to do the manual relationships and drawing those lines like we did on the pegboard. And it gets even better. Right now, by default, and I've added a couple of ones in here of my own, we simply have address, company, country, credit card, etc. Okay, keep this list in mind. These are the defaults, and like I said, I've added a couple of customs. The phone number down here is my own custom one. Well, I know I'm talking to a bunch of investigators out in the field, and I know for a fact that you're using tools that allow you to use regular expressions. A regular expression, for those of you who don't know, is simply a way to match a pattern, like a street address or a name or a country or a credit card. They all match patterns, like our IP addresses here. They match patterns. Our phone number matches a pattern. The email address matches a pattern. Well, what happens when the pattern you're looking for example, we don't have vehicle registration number here. We don't have USB serial number here. That's relatively easy. All I need to do in this is just go into my shortcut, go to my desktop, and immediately on my desktop, I've got a shortcut that allows me to go into where all of those files are located. All of those named entities, remember, we had company, country, credit card, email. All of these are regular expressions. Those of you who've worked with regexes before, you'll recognize this. That's for a country. This is for credit cards. Open that one up, and that shows a pattern that will match credit cards. This is very, very easy to do. All you need to do is drop your regular expressions into that one file, and from that moment on, they appear automatically in every single case you open up and process in Nuix. This saves tons of time. Now let's do a couple of other examples here. This is finding the classified keywords, the sandwich meats, the turkey, the chicken, the bologna, etc. Let's go ahead and work another sample case where Paul talked about earlier. We had a phone number, and in this case we had a phone number that we're looking for common phrases, common keywords, inflammatory, or propaganda type keywords that would relate our suspects together. Let's go ahead and do some of that. I'm going to go ahead and immediately go into my drug keywords for a drug case that we worked in the past. I've sanitized some of this data so that now we can see the sanitized data without compromising anything. And now in all of these individual drug keywords, what I would do is these are all hits on weed, cocaine, white powder, meth, crack, etc. And back in the day, again, let's go back to our default and how we used to have to do this. We used to have to go into each individual item and look at that particular email. Yep, that definitely looks like a hit there. That looks like it may or may not be a hit. We need our agents to look at that. And then we've got another hit down here where people, once again, are conspiring to sell drugs. Okay, we've got an item date and a file type and a path. I don't know who's selling what to who. I don't have a timeline. I don't have any real concrete evidence of what happened when. My classic poll, I'd have to dig on that. But once again, we go into our context and we filter out and present according to what person is talking to who. And again, what I'm doing here is I'm just doing a quick alphabetizing of the entities, going to what company is involved, and see, and these are all immediately associated. This person associated with this IP number, associated with this email from the United States in an Outlook note with this particular IP ID number going to this particular URL. All of these are associated immediately with each other, looking at them in context. And as the examiner goes through each individual one and looks at them and decides that, yes, indeed, they select that one and they tag it, and that is similar to a bookmark. Other technologies use the term bookmark. Nuix uses tags. We go ahead and we tag this, and we add a tag that's evidence of drug sales, or that's evidence of financial fraud, or that's our classified keyword, or if we're working a child exploitation case, that's a hit on our child exploitation keywords, or that's a positive image. We add those tags, and all that information now is located in our tagged area. And here we've got our classified keywords, our child exploitation, and our evidence of drug sales. And now after the examiner has gone through all of this information, let's go ahead and bring it back to our default. After our examiner has gone through all of these individual messages and determined that each individual one of these messages is associated with a drug transaction or evidence of possession with intent or evidence of sale of illicit substances, now what we would do is we would hand this off to our field agent. And then once again, back in the day, you'd have to call up the agent, you'd get together in a conference room, you'd take your findings report, and you present that to them. That takes the agent out of the field. And if we have to share from our local jurisdiction to the federal jurisdiction, or if our federal jurisdiction has to share with Interpol or another counterterrorism organization in another country, we'd all have to get together physically in the same location. Well, that is not the case here. Let me go ahead and close out here. Oh, let's minimize this. Oh, close that out. And now I'm going to go ahead and go into the web interface. Go ahead and restart that. Oh. Log into our web. And remember, we just gave this link. This is a web server. I just gave this link to an agent in another country or in another state and asked them to log in with the credentials I gave them And once again, look at this. We've got the exact same cases. We've got the email case, we've got the homicide case, the illegal sale and possession, our multi-data case. Let's go ahead and open that up. And in the multi-data case, go ahead and get our grid up. And in that multi-data case, these are the exact same items that have the exact same tags. Our evidence of drug use, go ahead and look at all those tags. And every single one of these messages that have been identified by the examiner in the lab is now immediately rendered to the field agent via a web browser. And remember, you can do this on a phone. You can do this on a tablet. The case agent, the field agent can do this in the field anywhere they're at where they've got internet connectivity. And what they can do is now they'll go into each individual item and they look at, this is not an appropriate item. This is not right. So what they do is they go into the manage tag, and then they'd either add their own tag or they would remove the tag that this was evidentiary if it's a false hit or if it's not appropriate. And now we look into the next item. Remember, these are the 69 items we tagged for our drug case. There it is. Yep, got our dope. And this looks like this might be Chinese characters. Now, we didn't notice that as an examiner, but the field agent now knows that. And now they can contact their counterpart in Taiwan. They can contact their counterpart in mainland China. They can contact whatever agent that they know that is also working the case for importation of this, quote, white powder from China or from Southeast Asia. They go to the next one. They continue we got people hanging out and getting high. Yep, that's a good piece of evidence. No, this is a false positive. Now what we have is we have the ability to share everything that is dumped in one single case across multiple evidence items reviewed by multiple field agents in multiple jurisdictions anywhere that these field agents have access to an internet connection. This is the way to solve our problem that Paul and David highlighted so well earlier on in the presentation. And I think I'm right about done with time here. Paul, I'd like to turn it back to you, sir, to wrap it up.
MJ, thank you very much for that. Thank you for showing us the software.
Thank you, sir.
So hopefully you've enjoyed our webinar. I guess in summary, we've tried to kind of bring out a few points here. Really just saying we do genuinely believe that investigators need to evolve beyond traditional forensic tools. And as MJ has kind of really eloquently demonstrated, having the ability to identify and share out key pieces of evidence and key files to agents wherever they are in the world at any time in the world, and to get them to actually comment and tag in real time back into the same case is really quite, it is a way to reduce those backlogs and to effectively enable people to find the evidence quicker. Key facts, as we said, not located within a single evidence container, and we can bring in, as MJ has demonstrated, data from all these different sources, from log files, from computers, from mobile devices. And really, we're trying to push the boundaries, and we're trying to move around, move the data to where it needs to be, and to stop investigators having to come to see the data. Why not sit where you are on the beach with your phone, with your iPad or whatever, and look at the same information in a forensically sound, evidentially sound manner. So thank you very much, everybody, for spending the last hour with us. And I'd like to just say thank you very much for MJ and for David to spend their time. We kind of got to the top of the hour. We did want to get some questions from you guys. If you do have any, please send them in the box. If we don't get to do them, please send them in via email, and we will take a look at them, and we will promise to respond back. If you want to find anything more about Nuix, there's a bunch of different ways to do that, whether it's come to our website, look at our blog, click the feed, Facebook, LinkedIn, or YouTube. Thanks very much for your time, and have a great afternoon. Thank you very much.